Living expenses? What do you mean by that? I've never received anything like that before. My mother-in-law looked genuinely baffled. Hey, what's going on? Brian, explain it properly. My husband, who was shrinking before us, was cornered by both myself and my mother-in-law. My name is Carol. I'm a 37-year-old office worker. I live with my husband, Brian, and my mother-in-law. Brian and I met through a mutual friend and quickly hit it off. We were married within 4 months of meeting each other. Since we were both over 35, our parents and in-laws were overjoyed. Our relationship was also great. Since our first visit for marriage introductions, my mother-in-law and I had gone out for meals several times and had become close. Initially, we lived separately but close by. However, after my father-in-law passed away, we moved in together. Despite what people say, there was no mother-in-law bullying and our life was going smoothly. My mother-in-law would do the housework instead of me. I felt guilty, but as often as I got home late, I depended on her. It might sound odd, but I was grateful and had been giving her some living expenses and a small token of appreciation through my husband. However, that didn't mean I could leave everything to her. But since she always said it was fine, I had been relying on her. Since my husband's food consumption has increased recently, I have become a bit worried about whether the amount of money I provide for our daily expenses will be sufficient. So I decided to discuss this with my husband first. Hey, about the living expenses we're giving to your mom, you've been eating a lot lately and she's been doing all the cooking and cleaning, right? I'm thinking we should increase it a bit. What do you think? Huh? It should be fine, right? She's probably happy that her son and daughter-in-law are living with her and she hasn't said anything about it being insufficient. Don't you think we need to show her appreciation? Not just in words, but in a tangible way. So I'll give a little more next month. Could you pass it on to your mom? At my suggestion, my husband nodded with a happy smile. Really? That's great. I was actually thinking the same thing. Thanks. I thought he was being a little too optimistic, but this wasn't the first time, so I decided not to worry about it. I decided to give a bit more. Then, a little while later, I had a severe accident. I collided with a bike at an intersection. I fractured a bone and had to be hospitalized for 2 weeks. My husband brought me my stuff on the first day. Hey, are you okay? It looks painful. I'll let my mom know. That would be great, thanks. Since it's a shared room, I can't make a call. Could you tell her that I'll contact her once I'm able to move? My husband cheerfully responded, Sure, I got it, and went home. I was a bit worried, but I told myself that's how he always is. But then a week passed. Despite waiting, my husband never came. Not even my mother-in-law. Even if my husband was busy with work, it was unthinkable that my overprotective mother-in-law wouldn't come to visit me when I'm not feeling well. I moved to the lounge room with crutches. There was no contact on my cell phone either. I called my husband first, but he didn't answer. Well, he's probably at work, I thought, and then I called my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law picked up on the third ring. Oh, Carol, you sound beat. What's up? Hi, mother-in-law. You must have heard from Brian, but I'll be in the hospital for another week. So I'm sorry, but I'll need some fresh clothes. What? Hospitalized? What happened? An injury? Illness? I could tell from the other end of the call that my mother-in-law was flustered. My mind was filled with question marks. There was no sign that my mother-in-law was lying. Could it be that Brian forgot to tell his mother? But if that was the case, she would have noticed my absence and called me immediately. Anyway, my mother-in-law quickly said she'd visit and hung up. And 30 minutes later, she appeared in front of me, drenched in sweat. The hospital is about 40 minutes from home by train and foot. She must have hurried over. Thank you for coming, mother-in-law. What did you hear from Brian? You were going on a business trip for 2 weeks. He told me it was sudden, so he asked me to pass it on. Yes, Brian is also on a business trip. At that statement, a possibility dawned on me. My husband might be cheating on me. Why? Because Brian is an illustrator, so he can work from anywhere. But according to him, the home environment is the best for work, and unless something significant comes up, he doesn't go out. Even if there are occasional local meetings, I know that the company doesn't arrange for a meeting that requires a business trip. How do I know? The answer is simple. Because I work in the same company as an administrative staff member. What's wrong? You look pale. Are you feeling unwell? Mother-in-law, our company wouldn't send Brian on a business trip. That's the job of the sales team. I'm in admin, so I don't go on business trips either. At my words, my mother-in-law tilted her head. I wished I could have been as naive. In other words, Brian lied. There's been no notification of his absence for a week, so I guess he's still working. I wonder where he really is. He left his injured wife in the hospital and lied to me. Did Brian tell you where he was going on business? Now that you mention it, he said he was staying in a hotel in Miami, that the company had arranged it. Oh yes, here it is. My mother-in-law showed me the hotel's website she found on her smartphone. It was a hotel we had stayed at during a previous vacation. It was where we stayed for our wedding anniversary. Of course, it was more expensive than other places, not a place where a company would cover the accommodation cost. I felt a headache coming on from such a sloppy alibi. Mother-in-law, this is hard to say, but Brian might be cheating. What? Brian? But this situation does seem suspicious. Oh, isn't this the hotel? Hold on a moment. Let's confirm if he's really there, my mother-in-law said and called somewhere. After a while, she hung up with a smirk on her face. They said they'll check it out for me. First, we need to verify the facts. Turns out that the hotel is run by my mother-in-law's relative. She told Brian about it before, but he either forgot or didn't care. About 10 minutes passed when I got a call from my mother-in-law. The results were damning. My husband, Brian, seemed to be staying overnight at that hotel, and with a woman no less. Although it was not allowed, the situation was special, and my mother-in-law told me the name which Brian was with. I was shocked to hear the name. I know her, actually. She's a friend of mine. Mother-in-law was equally surprised by this revelation. Turns out the other woman was my coworker and friend, Jessica. Jessica works in the same department as Brian. She was even the one who introduced me to him. She had attended our wedding, even giving a speech. Mother-in-law was furious, her face turning bright red. I had to hurriedly stop her from calling Brian. Let's gather solid evidence first. Hire a private detective. After that, I'm going to file for divorce. I can't accept a man who cheats with my friend. I plan to seek alimony, so I'm sorry for the trouble this will cause you, mother-in-law. Don't worry about it. I'll give that idiot son of mine a piece of my mind. How dare he betray such a good wife? When he comes back, he'll get a thrashing. I felt a bit uplifted by mother-in-law's words and started looking for a private detective. A relative of mother-in-law recommended a detective agency, and I decided to hire them. After reading the report they provided, I couldn't help but laugh. Turns out my friend, Jessica, was pretending to be the wife of my husband while they were on location. 3 days before my scheduled discharge from the hospital, I called Brian. I kept it a secret that mother-in-law knew about me. How are you feeling? I'm sorry I've been too busy to visit. I'll definitely pick you up on your discharge day. Do you need anything? No, I'm fine. Sorry for being a bother while you're so busy. Apparently my recovery is taking longer, so my discharge date has been extended. I'm just calling to let you know. I'm borrowing things like pajamas from the hospital, so no need to worry. Looks like I'll be discharged a week from now. Sorry for not being able to support you while you're so busy. Oh, could you withdraw money for the hospital bills? I don't have any cash on hand, so could you do it on my discharge day? I see. That sounds tough. All right, I should be done with my delivery in a week, so I'll go to the bank before picking you up. My mom's been worried too. She's caught a cold and feels bad for not being able to visit you. Brian nonchalantly lying through his teeth. Knowing it was all lies, I had to restrain myself from laughing. Oh, is that so? Please tell mother-in-law to take care. Did you manage to inform the office? Thank you. Did they say anything about allowances? Eh? Oh, they did. I'll take care of the procedures. You just rest and recover. Hope you get well soon. All right, thank you. See you in a week then. I already knew what Brian had told the office about me. I had confirmed it with the office before Brian's call. Brian apparently told the office that he was going on a trip and applied for my leave. So my boss asked right off the bat, "How was the trip? Are you getting good rest?" After I explained my situation, my boss decided to visit the hospital immediately. Not only my boss, but also the HR department came to the hospital. And it turns out I'm entitled to sick leave benefits. I found out that my husband, Brian, has been out of touch for about a week, and he's also running late on his deadlines. The same seems to be true for his mistress. They can't seem to get in touch with her either. It turns out that something like this has been going on for the past 6 months and it's finally come to a head. So they came to talk to me. I told my bosses that I wanted them not to mention this to Brian or his mistress until a week later. And after that, they can impose any punishment they see fit. As planned, I was discharged from the hospital. It seems that Brian had submitted another application for my paid leave, and his mother, my mother-in-law, got a call from him saying that his business trip was extended. Despite my hospital stay being extended because I'm not feeling well, he's extending his vacation with his mistress. It's clear there's no love left for me. I felt a bit sad. I decided to take my paid leave as planned. My boss told me to take as much time as I needed. For a week until Brian returned, my mother-in-law and I prepared to give him a piece of our minds. The day before, I was supposed to tell Brian about my discharge from the hospital. I called him. "Hello, how is your mother doing?" "I'm feeling good and I got discharged today. It was sudden, so don't worry about picking me up. I can pay with my credit card." "You're working today, right, Brian?" "Don't worry about me." "What? Really?" "Got it. I have a meeting soon and another one tonight, so I won't be home until late. Sorry." "That's fine. Don't worry about it. I'll take a taxi home." I barely held back a laugh at the sound of the shopping center announcement in the background of Brian's call, and responded. Then I calmly hung up the phone and pressed the button on the voice recorder. I had already heard from the detective that Brian was planning to go shopping today, so I intentionally called him at that time. When I checked the voice recorder, Brian's voice and the announcement were both clearly recorded. Brian had apparently contacted my mother-in-law, telling her that he was actually on vacation with a friend. He claimed it was a working vacation of sorts, so it wasn't exactly a lie. And he said that he had gotten my approval and that I had told him not to tell her about my hospitalizations so as not to worry my mother-in-law. I couldn't help but laugh at Brian's absurd excuses. The detective informed me that Brian had boarded a late-night flight back. My mother-in-law and I laid out all the documents on the table and waited for Brian to return. However, Brian called me and said this: "Sorry, the meeting ran late and I missed the last train. I'll be back on the first train tomorrow." "Is that so? That's tough." "Got it. Sorry I can't pick you up." I responded like that and hung up the phone. After enjoying a 3-week affair trip, it seems he still can't get enough. My mother-in-law was furious, but I found that my love for Brian had completely disappeared, and I was able to remain calm for the discussion. Then, the next day, looking exhausted, Brian came home loaded with souvenirs. "You went on a trip?" I didn't hear about that. Huh? Didn't I tell you? Sorry, my bad. I got friendly with a client and they invited me. Business relationships matter, right? My husband said nonchalantly as I took a bag from him and led him to the living room. I'm home. Hey, what's up with you, Mom? You look scary, Brian said, plopping down onto a chair with a grin on his face. He seemed to believe that his mother was on his side, but as soon as he saw the documents laid out on the table, his face went pale. I sat next to my mother-in-law and pointed at a photo. Oh yes, you seem to have had quite the fun. Your trip with Jessica. Leaving your injured wife for 3 weeks. Were you in a honeymoon mood? I asked. What's this? Carol, stop fooling around. Brian stammered at me, his face contorting. Unfortunately, this is no joke. I have evidence from a private detective. You were pretty careless, weren't you? Your dinner conversations were totally bugged. Staying at a hotel run by our relatives, you must have thought you wouldn't get caught. At this, Brian's face turned even more shocked. He looked at his mother for help. Mom, it was a lapse in judgment, A lapse in judgment that lasted 3 weeks seems a bit too long, don't you think? His mother cut him off with a cheerful smile. Brian, who had been hoping for help, was stunned. Here, these are documents for a claim for damages and a divorce application. Fill it out now. Damages? Divorce? Carol, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. The one I truly love is you. Can't you forgive me? Let's start over. In response, I pressed a button on my phone. Out flowed the voices of Brian and Jessica. It was a conversation recorded by the detective, hinting at a divorce with me and a remarriage with Jessica. Brian's face turned even bluer. It was just a spur-of-the-moment thing. I didn't mean it. I couldn't care less, really, I said, handing him the documents and urging him to write. Please, forgive me. I can't afford to pay any damages. Well, that's what happens when you splurge like that. Where did all that money come from, anyway? Brian mumbled something incoherent. I had a bad feeling about it. You didn't by chance use the living expenses I had been giving you to give to mother-in-law, did you? You have been passing it on to her, right? The person who reacted to my words was not Brian, but mother-in-law. Living expenses? What are you talking about? I've never received anything like that, mother-in-law said, seemingly genuinely unaware. Hey, what's going on here? Brian, explain it properly. Mother-in-law and I cornered Brian, who had shrunk considerably. I'm sorry, the living expenses. I used them for our dates. I felt my already icy affection for Brian grow even colder. He said he had spent the almost $2,000 I had been giving him every month. All of it. I told you that money was for groceries, utilities, and to thank mother-in-law. That money was mine in the first place. I'm sorry, my salary alone wasn't enough. It was clear what wasn't enough. The designer items Jessica had. Surely there must have been gifts from Brian. I swiftly raised my hand, but it was stopped by my mother-in-law. Brian, with hopeful eyes, watched as mother-in-law stopped me. He still seemed to think mother-in-law is on his side. You can't, Carol. If you lay a hand, it'll be your disadvantage, mother-in-law said, turning around to face Brian, then sharply slapped his cheek. To the stunned Brian, mother-in-law spoke calmly and monotonously. I've always thought the sillier the child, the cuter. I've spoiled you too much. Even with the bias, you grew up kind and your father and I were so happy when you got such a good wife, but now I'm cutting ties with you. But Mom, you're joking, right? Mother-in-law slapped away Brian's pleading hand and handed him a document. It contained a clause renouncing inheritance. Brian widened his eyes and muttered, I can't believe it. It doesn't matter if you can't believe it. It's all true. At mother-in-law's firm stance, Brian hung his head and signed. "Make sure you write this too. I'll be claiming from Jessica as well. I'll add on the amount she spent. Oh yes, the company knows everything." Brian, completely dejected and seemingly out of arguments, signed all the documents I presented. Afterward, mother-in-law kicked Brian out. He had apparently been misusing company entertainment expenses and was claimed for reimbursement from the company. Brian is said to be living in an apartment without a bath, forced into a poor lifestyle with what's left after paying alimony and reimbursement. Claimed alimony from his mistress, Jessica. Turns out Jessica was married and her husband was away on business, so I contacted her husband through social media and claimed alimony. As a result, Jessica avoided divorce but had to quit her job. She was forced to live with her husband's family. They live in a rural area without internet connection, and she's said to be forced to work from dawn till dusk. I ended up being adopted by mother-in-law. Having lost my parents early, I decided to take care of mother-in-law till the end. Mother-in-law was initially reluctant because of Brian's infidelity. However, in the end, she accepted, and we sold the house, bought a new house for just the two of us. I want to take good care of mother-in-law.